This is exactly when we should be expecting XRP and the rest of the crypto space to go absolutely crazy. So far this cycle, it feels as if no matter what we do to try to predict when something's going to happen, aka alt season, right? Alt season has been the biggest thing that everyone has been focused on. Almost every single prediction has been just nonsense. It hasn't resulted in anything. And, this has led everyone to be a little bit more frustrated. And we're starting to see, the impatience becoming a reality here as well for a lot of people, which is causing, a big sell off in the market as well because people are tired of waiting. They're scared. They're, worried. They're concerned. The main thing that we have been focused on is simply the 4-year cycle. Everyone has been talking about it. Everyone has been addressing it. And even now, a lot of people are calling for a 5-year cycle, and cycles are extending, and X, Y, and Z. And I think that the main thing that we are looking at with crypto is, the 4-year cycle never really was a big focus. And I said this in previous videos as well. We never really followed a 4-year cycle. We followed liquidity. Liquidity is the driver of every single market. Crypto just loves liquidity a lot more because of how small the market is. So when we start to see liquidity flowing in, the moves get more volatile than any other market, which is also why a lot of people love crypto. Now, the main problem with that is that liquidity works in both ways. So when we start to see liquidity being siphoned, well, crypto hates that because of how small the market is, which is also why we start to see things like Terra Luna going, bust. And we also start to see exchanges getting completely wiped out. And we start to see rug pulls happen. And we start to see, projects going to zero. It's all because of liquidity. And especially at a time where most of these projects aren't really doing anything. I mean, a lot of this is just vapor where tech. A lot of these projects get completely wiped out because there's no actual use of the network, which is exactly why we think most of these projects are overvalued. However, the main thing that we're looking at here is just liquidity improving, which will lead to the market pumping. The question here, though, is when should we be expecting this market to officially top out? When should we be expecting alt season to officially happen? And everyone is trying to base it on previous cycles. And I think that this is the biggest mistake. Just take XRP for an example, right? If we're looking at this on the 1 month, and if we're going from cycle top from 2017, 2018 to the cycle top in 2021, it was about 1,186 days. If we're going off of that top and we're going off of some of our previous wicks here, I mean, even if we go off of the January wick, okay, we're talking about 1,370 plus days. To our most recent price action, 1,705 days. Pretty wild, huh? Again, if we're going off of time frame, I feel like I just feel like a lot of these charts are telling us exactly what we should really kind of come to realize, which is cycles are extending in crypto, but it's because of the liquidity cycle also extending in a sense. But also with increased adoption, market maturity, things like that, we will start to see the market extend its cycles. We won't see the typical 4-year run and, the 4-year, bull run actually happen. We'll start to see that change over time, which is to be expected with, markets maturing. Now, everyone has been still trying to base Bitcoin's chart off of previous cycles. And I think that it's a little bit more accurate when it comes back to Bitcoin because we don't have just, 1, 2, 3 runs. We have multiple runs in history of Bitcoin that we can kind of base this off of. If we're looking at Bitcoin on the log scale and we're looking at the previous cycles, we go back to 2013, 2014, going off of that top to our, 2017, 2018 top. We're talking about 1,491 days. We're going off of that top to our 2021 top, which was roughly in November of 2021. That's 1,431 days. And again, this is less days, so we shouldn't be extending, right? And then, of course, we do have our most recent run, which was about 1,430 days. So is the market topped out? And this is where a lot of people think that the market is topped out, because we hit that 1,430 day mark. So we should be done. The bull run should be commencing. Everything is over. Altcoins are done. They're dead. Just, wrap up the show and call it a night. But what if I said that this is the wrong way to look at the market extending? This is the wrong way to really focus on how these markets are changing and how the 4-year cycle is basically done. It's finished. We're going to go over that. Now, the main thing that I'm looking at here is what previous videos have told us. For example, Raoul Pal. Now, I'm not a huge fan of a lot of these analysts. We've talked about Raoul Pal in the past and a lot of his price predictions or his just market predictions. We've been hearing about the banana zone for well over 2 years now. He even said here the 4-year cycle is now the 5-year cycle. Bitcoin should peak in 2026, probably Q2. Again, originally what we heard from Raoul Pal was, all right, well, the market's going to run all the way into October of 2026. Now it's probably Q2 of 2026. And, before it was the banana zone going into the summer and the, fall time frame of 2025. A lot of these price predictions or just market predictions have been starting to become skewed. Whenever something doesn't work out, it's always something different. And I think that that's the biggest issue. And I understand that analysts are going to change their opinion over time, but it feels as if we're always clinging to a new narrative. And I'll play this video clip just so that you guys know exactly what he's talking about. So listen closely.
Why is Bitcoin sort of not wildly off to the races yet? And it's this chart. Bitcoin is basically, this is a detrended Bitcoin. And it's basically the ISM, which is the business cycle. Remember, we've always said it's the business cycle stupid. It is always the business cycle stupid. And all of these people who claim it's the 4-year cycle based around this and that, they don't understand the fundamental of what the business cycle is, why there's a 4-year cycle in everything. And we've explained it. And we'll go through it in great detail tomorrow in our Everything Code presentation. But basically, it's following the ISM. And rates have been following the same pattern. You see, rates should have come lower. They need to come lower because we need to roll the debt. We've talked about this. That's part of the Everything Code, fundamental part. And ISM, because rates are so high, has meant that Main Street has been screwed while Wall Street's made money from debasement. Earnings versus scarce assets. This is the issue that they need to solve, and they need to get rates lower. They get rates lower. Why? Why do we have an elongated business cycle that looks like virtually no other other time? It's because, and I only just found this out redoing the work on the Everything Code recently, is that in 2021-22, they actually extended the maturity of the debt from 4 years to 5 years. So that extension of the maturity of debt has pushed out the business cycle a year. The 4-year cycle this time around is a 5-year cycle. We don't know what the next one will be until we see where they all end up getting refinanced, whether it comes back to 4 because they managed to get some stuff at the long end, or whether they shorten it because everything's in the short end. We don't know yet. But this one is a 5-year cycle. And this is what it looks like. The 5.4-year sine curve, 5.4 years is the exact average weighted maturity of the debt. And it tells us the ISM should peak by 2026. We think liquidity probably peaks before that, as the rate of change of ISM changes and the rate of change of liquidity changes. Our best guess remains well into 2026, probably Q2.
Now, the issue with this argument that I personally have is this 4-year cycle narrative. First off, let's think about this logically. Bear market ends in November of 2022. That means that the 4-year cycle technically takes us to 2026 anyways. The time frame hasn't changed necessarily. The problem is that everyone expected that the 4-year cycle would be 2025, even though that's only 3 years. Now, I will say that runs will extend. We know this is true. However, everything is following one chart. And that's this chart from Capital Wars, which is the global liquidity cycle. We've talked about this on multiple occasions. If we're open this up in a new tab real quick. Okay, so far, liquidity has started to peak a bit. But, and I know that you guys can't see the dates here. You can see the dates on this one, right? And let's just, kind of zoom in real quick so that you guys could see it. You can see that 2026, very similar to 2021, would be the time where liquidity, peaks. This would be the same exact game plan from the 2020-2021 cycle. Now, you might say, well, Nick, nothing has really kind of held up with that argument because, again, the market already has been running. We've been running for so many days. We haven't really witnessed altcoins go crazy. Like, what's the difference here? Like, what is the big time frame that we should be following? Well, realistically speaking, and if we're going off of Bitcoin, okay, and this is what I mean by, like, if we're going off of top to top, that's not the correct way to go about this. In fact, what we should be looking at is from bottom to top. Our bottom from 2011 to our top in 2013 on Bitcoin was 735 days. Our bottom from 2015 to our top in December of 2017 was 854 days. Our bottom going back to 2018 to our top in 2021 was 1,057 days. From our bottom back in 2022 to our current price action, okay, is 1,141 days. I went ahead and I asked AI, because again, I just want to see what AI would give us in terms of date ranges. Obviously, we're not going off of AI for this price prediction or anything like that. But I said, considering Bitcoin's previous bull runs lasted 735, 854, and 1,057 days, typically increasing each cycle, what would be an accurate amount of days that Bitcoin runs this cycle? Well, here we have some of the math. Obviously, the day difference here, we could see the day difference, 119 and then 203 days. If we're going off of this, what we should be looking at just by the trend projection, it would be about 1,218 days. Where does that take us into, 2026? Well, it's like roughly late February. I know that this is 1,211 days, but again, it's like roughly late February. Now, that's just the 1,218 days. The percent increases here, if we're looking at that, average would be about almost 20%. That would take us to about 1,268 days. Again, 1,268 days. We can't get it, fully accurate. We'll just kind of go off of the April 2026 timeframe. And then, last but not least, we have the summary. So, if we're going off of the typical time frame range, it's going to be about roughly between 1,200 to 1,270. Which is like the 3.5 year mark. Now, 1,270, again, it's like around April. Most altcoins back in 2021 topped out around like April, May of 2021. They didn't return in the fall timeframe. Now, I also did ask, with institutional adoption and market maturity, like what could be the difference this time around? Will it make a difference? Again, we're kind of going off of the 1,220 to 1,300 day time frame here. The most accurate estimate would be 1,200 to 1,250. Again, that would align with the February-April time frame. And this is, aligned with ETF-driven accumulation, more sophisticated derivatives markets, and institutional risk management. But then I said that the increase itself is growing. We have a 70% larger increase, applying a similar expansion, roughly 1,300 to 1,400 days. If we're going off of 1300 to 1400, the time frame there, it's actually interesting because this aligns with midterms, number one. Number two, it aligns with like the tax season as well. So, returns come in, people investing that money. If we're going off of everything happening around this market, if we're going off of just the 1300 day time frame, and I'll go off of 1295, May of 2026. I'm not saying that Raul Paul is correct, but I do think that his Q2 time frame here would be accurate, just going off of the typical expansion on Bitcoin driven cycles. And by the way, during this time, you might be questioning, well, all right, well, that's Bitcoin. What about altcoins? If we're going off of this extension in the market, and even if we're going off of, this exact bottom, or potentially even, this being the bottom, it still just kind of pushes us into like the, fall time frame. I would say like, May of 2026 would be the better, prediction here. But with altcoins, it's interesting because we do have Bitcoin dominance here, and our previous cycle, again, I'm going off of the bottom here. Okay, so this is the bottom, and then we have the top officially for Bitcoin dominance. Now, this is on the 3-week structure. We have 1,092 days, and then so far from our bottom to where we're currently trading at, we're about 1,200 days. It's 1,204 days. If we're going off of Bitcoin extending, okay, if Bitcoin is going to extend, we should also see an extension in terms of Bitcoin dominance waiting for that big drop. I do think that we're getting closer to this really having a major sell-off. My overall view on altcoins running, I would say that we're more in line with, what we saw back in 2020. So I would argue that Bitcoin dominance will most likely chop throughout this month. We shouldn't be expecting a significant sell-off or anything like that on this chart. Reason why? Bitcoin is still chopping, okay? We're still watching for Bitcoin to have, a much larger reaction on the chart. The 4-hour structure right now on this chart, which, we've been kind of in line with for a while now. We've been talking about it for a bit of time. The 4-hour mark is still kind of dead set on us potentially having a, sell-off here back down to like 86.5K, which is what we should be expecting anyways. And then after we have that sell-off, we should start to kind of chop, and then we should have that big break to the upside. Again, that would kind of align with Bitcoin dominance, having a nice little chop here, and then finally potentially having, another wick to the upside before it gets hammered to the downside. But that should take us into about roughly the end of the month, into even like January. Again, aligned perfectly with what we saw back in 2020 to 2021. I'm not saying that we're following this cycle perfectly. I'm just saying that the time frame wise is very accurate, and it's really, I would say, kind of mirroring that time frame. But the cycle has extended. I mean, realistically, the market has extended, and the only reason why that we're starting to see that extension when it comes back to Bitcoin is that we're still following liquidity, number one. Number two, we technically didn't extend the cycle that much at all. It's a difference of roughly like 100 or 200 days. But that's what we've witnessed in the past. We've witnessed this happen cycle over cycle. And I find it very surprising that most people haven't realized this when looking at the Bitcoin chart. The cycles will continue to expand. With increased adoption, with increased, participation from retail, but also institutional players, the market will start to expand the cycles. But when it comes back to XRP, when it comes back to altcoins running, again, most of these altcoin runs will start to happen when we start to see Bitcoin, having its last major push to the upside. And by the way, Bitcoin won't run that crazy. If we're going off of, when Bitcoin started to really run back in 2021, And, with altcoins going crazy, Bitcoin only had roughly like a 100% push to the upside. It wasn't that much. Like Bitcoin already had such a significant run up. And Bitcoin also has been running during this time for well over, and this is again going right into alt season, it was already running for 763 days. That's going off of the bottom. So far, Bitcoin has already been running 1,295 days, almost an increase. We're almost talking about a double view here in terms of the amount of days that, Bitcoin has been running. Currently speaking, our, time frame here has been 1,141 days that Bitcoin has been running for. But the main thing that we're looking at here is that Bitcoin doesn't really need to have a crazy amount of, gains here now just to carry the altcoin market. In fact, the main thing that I would be looking at here is just kind of like a 70% jump. A 70% jump to like 150, 160K or so. That's enough for altcoins to go absolutely insane if we're going to start to see Bitcoin dumps having a drop like we did see in previous cycles. Now, when should we be expecting that? Well, we should start to see a weakened Bitcoin dumps going into January. So far, this chart has been telling us that it's been very, very bearish. If I remove everything off of this chart, just to kind of look at it real quick, we do have our high back in June and May. And then, of course, we do have our lower highs here with major wicks to the upside telling us that this thing is pretty bearish. So I'm expecting this thing to really start to drop going into January, very similar back to 2021. And then we should start to see altcoins really follow Bitcoin in a big way once it has this like 70% jump in value. Over time, and we've gone over this as well, whenever Bitcoin does have a major sell-off, what do we typically see on altcoins? They're exaggerated, right? The drop on them is exaggerated. If Bitcoin drops 7%, some altcoins drop 20+%. The same goes for when Bitcoin jumps 70+%, while Bitcoin dumps is dropping in a big way, we start to see an exaggerated move on altcoins to the upside, which could mean, if Bitcoin's having a run up to 70%, we could see altcoins going up 700%. And that's what we really call alt season. So what's the time frame here? Well, if Bitcoin's going to top, say for so, it's 1,200 days. We'll say 1,200 or even, push it to 1,300 days. Bitcoin should be roughly done around Q2, the latest of 2026, right? Our sweet spot for that, because again, Bitcoin technically ran our original top for most altcoins was around like the March-May timeframe. So it ran about roughly 800, almost 900 days out of its original 1,000 days. So I would say the perfect time frame for most altcoins to have that crazy run up and hit their initial topping points, I would say it would be around like the February-March timeframe, and then the rest of the cycle, we just kind of have like smaller moves to the upside. So again, Q1 would be the focus for altcoins. Q2 should be, kind of wrapping up the show. Again, could this be wrong? Could all of this be wrong? 100%. Listen, I'm trying to go off of, what we see from our previous patterns, which our previous patterns are the fact that, Bitcoin has been extending its cycles. Liquidity is telling us that 2026 is going to be a very good year for liquidity. And so far, what have we been seeing going into 2026? The Fed ending QT. We're starting to see injections into specific pieces of the economy. I just feel as if with liquidity provisions changing, with cycles extending, and again, they're not technically extending. I mean, our bottom was back in 2022. Our typical time frame would be about 3.5 years. We're still kind of looking at the halfway mark going into 2026. So Q2 should be 3.5 years, realistically speaking. So, that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at, Q2 of 2026. And I know that that kind of aligns with Raoul Paul here, but I think that his 5-year cycle idea here is incorrect because realistically speaking, we're kind of right on cue for the 4-year cycle, which is only aligned with liquidity. That's the 4-year cycle. liquidity is the driver here. This is the only thing that's been driving markets, forever. Liquidity. So with that being said, I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys did, definitely like, subscribe, notifications on because more free content. You guys are more than welcome to follow me on Twitter and join the free Discord in the description below. And with that being said, guys, it's been Nick. Thanks for watching. Peace out.